Hi guys, welcome back to The Spotlight Kid. I'm Benjamin Dudai. Today we're going to be ranking the studio albums of the fantastic band and one of my personal favorites, Crimson Glory. So even though they have a very short discography, only 4 albums, all four albums are pretty great and have their own merits and are quite unique from each other, actually. The band was formed all the way back in 1979, the year of my birth, and they hail from Sarasota, Florida. After going through a whole range of lineup changes and name changes, they were Pierced Arrow at one stage, they were Beowulf, and eventually they settled on Crimson Glory. And the lineup became more fixed, and they found the great singer Midnight, and they were off and running. And so anyway, let's have a look at these 4 albums and let's rank them. So coming in at the bottom for me, in the number 4 position will be Astronomica, released in August 10th, 1999. On this album, this was the only one of the 4 albums, that didn't have Midnight on lead vocals. Midnight at the time was approached by the guys, John Drenning and Jeff Lords, to return to the band for that album, and the music was sort of written with the intention of Midnight singing on it, but he was unwell at the time and just not fit for the task. So they hired Wade Black to take over the vocal duties, and he does a admirable job. But Midnight is such an integral part of the sound of Crimson Glory, that and as much as I like a lot of the actual band sounds great on this album. It really kicks. I love how fat the bass is. Jeff Lords, who was the bass player, sounds awesome on this album. He's always good, but he really, he's really loud in the mix for one thing, so you can hear exactly what he's doing at all times. But it just sounds fat and ballsy, and it's really great. There are some standout tracks like War of the Worlds, Kicks. That's a great song. Astronomica, great title track. Edge of Forever has a bit of that the same vibe as the previous album, Strange and Beautiful. It's a really enjoyable and pretty epic song, actually. It does have a little bit of there are moments on this album that have a little bit of those 90s sort of tropes, and which, I don't know, it kind of feels a little dated to me. And I know, like, as somebody who's a fan of 80s metal, like, there's plenty of elements of 80s metal that sounds dated too, but it sounds great. There's something about the 90s, even though I'm a 90s kid, that at times is, I don't know, it's a little cringy, but that doesn't speak for the whole album. On the whole, this is a good album. I think if it was under the banner of another band, not Crimson Glory, I would probably find it easier to digest. But anyway, so it's my number 4. So number 3 will be the previously mentioned Strange and Beautiful. So this was the 3rd studio album from the band. It was released on June 24th, 1991, and you had, this time the lineup had changed a little bit from the classic lineup. You had Midnight still on vocals, John Drenning on guitar, Jeff Lords on the bass, and they had replaced Dana Burnell with Ravi Jacotia. I'm sorry, I'm getting that name. I'm messing that up big time, but I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce it. And you know, they had a bunch of other musicians on the album as well. John Avarese on keyboards, Ned Hardman, Charlene and Paul Holloway doing backup vocals, and Rick Sandler on grand piano. Daryl Burgee doing percussion, Ron Kerber doing saxophone, and Babatunde Olatunji doing the intro vocal on Promised Land. So Strange and Beautiful was a departure for the guys. You know, they sort of were entering the 90s. They lost two of their core members in Ben Jackson and Dana Burnell, and they wanted to try something a little different with Strange and Beautiful. They sort of, you know, imagine like you take elements of Led Zeppelin, maybe a bit of Badlands, and sort of mix it up with sort of the sort of poppy hair metal of the time, of the late 80s and early 90s, that was still sort of hanging on there for dear life before grunge came and butchered all of that. That's all sort of mixed in, still with Midnight's, you know, fantastic, unique vocal delivery, but definitely with a more commercial approach and sort of pop approach at times. There's some really great songs on here. Strange and Beautiful, the title track, is a great song in my opinion. I love that song. It's my favorite on the album. Promised Land is pretty good. Definitely poppy. The chant as well. In the Mood is cool. It has sort of strange but familiar grooves, and you know, Midnight sort of at his most midnight, I think, on the album maybe. Except for maybe Strange and Beautiful. A cool album. I don't listen to it all that much, and in some ways I probably prefer some of the music on Astronomica, but the fact that Midnight is on this album and I'm such a fan of his vocals, I think it just edges out Astronomica for me. Now we're going to get into some controversial territory here. It was really hard to pick, you know, obviously the last two albums, between the last two, Transcendence and the self-titled Crimson Glory. I know most people will disagree with me here, and some days I might even disagree with me on this one, but today I'm going to put at number 2 Transcendence, released in November 14th, 1988. Here you have the classic lineup of the band with Midnight on vocals, John Drenning on lead guitar, Ben Jackson on rhythm guitar, Jeff Lords on bass, and Dana Burnell on drums. Now this album is sort of widely regarded as as the quintessential Crimson Glory album, their masterpiece. And you know, I can't disagree with that. It is a masterpiece. It's a perfect album, really. And trying to pick a standout track, you know, like we'll throw a dart. You know, any Lady of Winter, Painted Skies, Mask of the Red Death, In Dark Places, Red Sharks, Lonely, Transcendent. I mean, the whole album is perfection. And probably if I was going to introduce somebody to Crimson Glory, I might start with this album because it is such a masterpiece. But then again, I might also go with the choice for the first place, which is, of course, Crimson Glory, which was released in 1986, October 20th. Also with the same lineup, and also an absolutely perfect album. This one, it was really hard to choose between these two albums, of course, because they're both so good. But And for me, there's something about the debut that is just so special. There's a kind of magic to it. Every once in a while, you pick up an album, and it's got like a sort of mystical quality to it. Something it's undefinable, but for some reason it just hooks you and it connects with you, and it just stays there. It doesn't go away. And that's how I feel about Crimson Glory, the first album. It's another perfect album. I mean, what isn't a good track on this album? Valhalla, Dragon Lady, Heart of Steel, Azrael, Mayday, Queen of the Masquerade, Angels of War, and Lost Reflection. When I reviewed this album on my channel, I gave it a perfect score because it's perfect. For me, I love every track on this album. I love the big washy 80s production, you know, with all the reverb. Midnight he's perfect on both these albums, Transcendence and Crimson Glory. He is absolutely at his peak, and so is the band. The guitar playing from John Drenning and Ben Jackson is really highly underrated in my opinion. These guys were an awesome guitar duo with their dual guitar attack, their dual harmonies. There's shredding all over the place, lead lines all over the place, little ornamentations and flourishes, and it's a guitar extravaganza. You know, any guitar players should get a real kick out of this album. And it's also kind of the beginning of, these guys are one of the early progressive metal bands. Not super progressive, and they got more progressive on Transcendence than on the first album, but it's definitely there. And they definitely need to get credit for being there at the beginning of that movement too. So that's it, guys. That's my ranking. So once again, from number 1, Crimson Glory, number 2, Transcendence, number 3, Strange and Beautiful, and number 4, Astronomica. If you're unfamiliar with Crimson Glory, I highly recommend you go out and check out especially those first 2 albums, Crimson Glory and Transcendence. You really can't go wrong with them. They are 2 perfect heavy metal albums, progressive metal albums, whatever you want to call it. Anyway, guys, that's it for today's ranking. Thanks for joining me. I'll have more of these coming pretty soon and more content for the channel. And anyway, in the meantime, stay metal and see you next time.